In 1943, German engineers took apart a captured American tank and realized the war was already lost, not because of a bigger gun, but because of a single stamped bolt. The story begins in August 1942, under the burning sun of North Africa near El Alamein, where a strange silhouette sat half buried in the sand. It was a knocked-out American M4 Sherman, its hull scorched but still recognizable. A group of German officers and engineers from the Africa Corps stood around the wreck, their tan uniforms covered in dust. They circled the machine, measuring the armor with calipers and tapping the steel with gloved knuckles while muttering in disbelief. One of them sneered, "This is what the Americans send to war? Too tall, too thin, too simple. It is a toy, not a tank." To men who worshipped machines like the Panzer IV and the Tiger, this foreign machine looked absurd, an ungainly box on tracks that felt almost civilian in its proportions. This mockery echoed in research centers across Europe, where the German press dismissed the Sherman as a mobile coffin. Panzer commanders saw them as easy prey, finding the idea that such a clumsy-looking tank could challenge the legendary Tigers to be ridiculous. However, as the desert wind blew sand into the tank's open hatches, one German engineer examined the interior and felt a flicker of doubt. He noticed the controls were surprisingly simple. The transmission levers, gauges, and radio were all clear, standardized, and intuitive. There was no intricate gear system or custom-made parts, only functional design. He noted in his logbook that the mass-produced layout resembled a civilian automotive style. He did not realize it yet, but those words hinted at the secret that would eventually decide the war. While Berlin remained confident in their handcrafted, powerful masterpieces like the Tiger I, which could destroy a Sherman from a mile away, they failed to see the true battlefield. The real fight was not made of sand or steel, but of assembly lines. By the time of El Alamein, the United States had been at war for less than a year, yet its factories were already pivoting from car production to total war output. Names like Ford, Chrysler, and General Motors were now turning out tanks and engines at an unimaginable scale. Every Sherman looked the same because it was the same. Every bolt, track link, and lever could be swapped with another built thousands of miles away. The German engineers staring at that wreck in the desert did not yet understand the genius hidden in that simplicity. As one American soldier later put it, "We built Tigers like jewelry. We built Shermans like hammers." The difference was philosophical. Germany believed perfection would win wars, while America believed production would. In the long run, production always outlives perfection. The wrecked Sherman stood as a silent witness to the coming truth that the future of warfare belonged to the system that could build, repair, and replace faster than the enemy could destroy. By winter 1943, at the Kumerdorf proving ground south of Berlin, German curiosity turned into a formal investigation. Engineers gathered around a freshly captured M4A1 Sherman, which was labeled simply as U.S. Panzer Type M4. Senior engineer Klaus Mittner approached the machine with a clipboard, initially viewing it as crude and agricultural. The welds seemed rough, and the cast turret looked primitive compared to the angular precision of a Panther. But as his team began to take the tank apart piece by piece, their arrogance dissolved. The first surprise was the engine, a Continental R975 air-cooled radial originally designed for aircraft. While Mittner initially thought putting an airplane engine in a tank was madness, the team found it roared to life immediately, showing no leaks or complex piping. The simplicity was startling. A young assistant noted that it started easier than a Panzer III, while Mittner noticed that every bolt, bracket, and wire were numbered and labeled for quick replacement by unskilled mechanics. When they reached the gearbox, they discovered a transmission housing with a cast number identical to one found on a different tank captured in Italy. This meant the parts were completely interchangeable, a concept foreign to Germans accustomed to hand-fitted parts and custom machining. They realized they were looking at a product built like a car rather than a military masterpiece. The radio compartment provided another shock. Every Sherman came with a standardized long-range transmitter, whereas in German armies, radios were a luxury reserved for command tanks. As they worked through the night, more details defied German logic. The Sherman's tracks were lighter and easier to remove, and its suspension used simple vertical volute springs rather than complex torsion bars, allowing a unit to be replaced in under an hour. The interior layout prioritized crew comfort and efficiency over perfection of form. By morning, the hangar floor was covered in labeled components, revealing an unsettling picture. The Sherman was not designed for excellence, but for speed of repair and replacement. Mittner's report noted that while the armor was inferior to German rolled plate, its consistency was remarkable, and its operation was simplified for personnel with limited technical experience. He concluded that the production method indicated large-scale automotive adaptation, a fact that terrified him more than the tank itself. Germany's industry was still built around craftsmanship and artisans laboring for weeks on single components, while American car factories had converted into conveyor belt tank plants. When asked if they could copy the Sherman, Mittner admitted they could build one, but they could not build 10,000 of them with their current tools and workforce, especially under constant Allied bombing. That night, Mittner sat alone, staring at a stamped American bolt he had kept. He marveled at the precision and confidence it represented, seeing a truth no general wanted to admit. The Americans were winning through standardization. By early 1944, as the Allies prepared for the invasion of Europe, the Sherman had earned a mixed reputation. American crews jokingly called it the Ronson because it lit up every time it was hit, while Germans called it the Tommy Cooker. German propaganda claimed a single Tiger could destroy a dozen Shermans, but they missed the point. The Sherman's real power was that it was never designed to be immortal. It was designed to die and be replaced endlessly. At the Detroit tank arsenal, conveyor belts rolled like veins of steel, and a new Sherman emerged every 56 minutes. America didn't just build tanks, it built the idea that tanks could never run out. By 1944, 11 different factories were producing the M4, and despite different configurations, they all shared interchangeable parts. A turret from Michigan could sit on a chassis from California, a feat of modular warfare decades ahead of its time. In contrast, every German tank was practically handmade. A 3AM Tiger required 300,000 labor hours to build, while a Sherman took less than 50,000 with far less specialized tooling. Where the Tiger demanded obsessive precision, the Sherman demanded only repetition. German designers saw this as proof of inferiority, but it was actually genius. American engineers understood that war consumes machines faster than perfection can produce them. The Sherman's suspension could be repaired in the field with a crowbar, while the Tiger's complex wheels clogged with mud and froze in winter. Every simplification was a sacrifice of elegance for endurance. The Sherman was not a better tank in a technical duel, it was a better idea of a tank built to survive a long war. The math was inevitable. While one Tiger could statistically destroy 5 Shermans, America could replace those 5 tanks faster than Germany could repair 1 Tiger. This industrial rhythm extended to logistics, with replacement engines arriving pre-crated and entire drivetrains being swapped in less than a day by mechanics who only needed a wrench and a manual. By mid-1944, the United States was producing 2,000 Shermans a month, more than the entire German output of all tank types combined. The Reich was trapped in a race it had already lost. When German intelligence saw that the Americans were harvesting components from knocked-out tanks to reuse them, they realized the Americans treated tanks as consumables, not icons. The Sherman was expendable by design, existing to keep moving forward rather than to be preserved. In the spring of 1944, in northern France, German Tiger crews still felt superior. A Tiger's 88mm cannon could rip through a Sherman easily, and its armor could shrug off direct hits. But a different kind of fear was spreading, measured in numbers rather than caliber. A veteran Tiger commander near Villers-Bocage watched as dozens of Shermans advanced like a moving wall. He destroyed several, but more just kept appearing behind the smoke. They never stopped coming. By the time his ammunition was empty, the enemy still filled the horizon. This endless wave broke the morale of even the best crews. The propaganda promised that one German tank was worth 10 American ones, but by 1944, the arithmetic no longer worked. Every Tiger loss was a disaster. Every Sherman loss was an inconvenience. Field reports from the SS Panzer divisions noted that tactical victories no longer mattered. Even after destroying dozens of enemy tanks, the Germans would find themselves retreating a week later because the Americans had already replaced every single loss. Tiger ace Otto Carius wrote that for every Sherman destroyed, 3 more appeared. You could destroy the machine, but not the factory that birthed it. The Tiger was absolute but fragile, where one broken gearbox could immobilize it for weeks, while a Sherman's gearbox could be replaced in an afternoon. Hitler's armaments minister Albert Speer pleaded for simplification, but Hitler refused, believing quality was a matter of prestige and quantity was for the weak. This irony doomed the Reich's armored corps. While American mechanics worked like surgeons on a production line, returning damaged tanks to combat within 24 hours, German mechanics faced scarcity of spare parts and incompatible components even between the same tank models. Frontline officers finally understood they were fighting an economy, not just an army. The Reich believed it could outfight a nation whose greatest weapon was organization itself. As the Allies advanced, the wrecks of German armor lined the roads as monuments to a philosophy that confused perfection with power.
The heart of this power was Detroit. Inside plants like Ford's River Rouge, the clanging of rivets and the hiss of welding torches merged into a mechanical symphony. The nation that built cars for families was now building freedom in steel. Across the Midwest, Cleveland built engines, Chicago built transmissions, and Pittsburgh poured the steel. By the end of 1943, 18 million workers, including 2 million women known as Rosie the Riveters, were mobilized for war production. At the Chrysler Tank Arsenal, a tank entered the line as a skeleton and rolled out 90 minutes later under its own power. In a single month, this one plant produced more Shermans than Germany could produce of all armored vehicles combined. This was made possible by the genius of standardization. Every factory used the same blueprints and part numbers. A mechanic in France could open a crate from Detroit and the part would fit perfectly without adjustment. American factories ran for 30 months without a single day's pause, producing one Sherman every 30 minutes by mid-1944. This industrial nightmare for the Germans was supported by a massive logistics orchestra that moved 80 million tons of iron ore and 10,000 engines a month. America had even solved the problem of maintenance in motion, shipping spare parts in crates labeled with pictograms so soldiers could identify them quickly. Mobile repair units followed the front lines, ensuring that every damaged tank was only a temporary problem. By autumn 1944, as the night skies over Germany glowed with the light of Allied bombers, the Reich's leading engineers had their moment of reckoning. Heinz Nipkamp, responsible for the Tiger and Panther designs, read reports from Normandy showing that despite heavy losses, the total number of American tanks had actually increased. He realized they were losing to arithmetic. His production analysis showed the staggering gap. While Germany produced hundreds of tanks, the United States was producing thousands of tanks, tank destroyers, and aircraft. "They are making engines faster than we can make bolts," he murmured. Albert Speer, seeing that 40,000 Shermans had been produced by 1944, admitted this was no longer war, but slaughter by industry. He realized they were craftsmen fighting an engineer civilization. The Tiger's complexity had become its fatal weakness. While Germans designed for gods, Americans designed for the average mechanic. By early 1945, Hitler still dismissed the production data as propaganda, pinned his hopes on miracle weapons like jet fighters, but the reality was that the nation was out of oil, steel, and time. In one final irony, American engineers examining a captured Tiger II noted the exquisite polished machining of its components, calling it beautiful but impossible to mass produce. The very perfection that symbolized German strength had become the reason for its collapse. When the war ended, the Reich had produced under 50,000 tanks, while America had produced over 88,000, not counting tens of thousands more from Britain and the Soviet Union. In May 1945, the guns fell silent. Broken Tigers and Panthers sat motionless along the roads, while dusty but alive Shermans rolled into the heart of Berlin. Allied engineers touring bombed-out German factories found brilliant machines, but a failed system that could not outproduce the factory that never sleeps. When Nipkamp was shown a single Sherman bolt and asked if Germany could have made it, he replied they could have made one, but the American officer noted they had made 1,000,000. Nipkamp realized then that the Americans had won twice, first on the battlefield and then in the factory. The Sherman was the herald of a new industrial age, where innovation was measured by the scale of a system rather than the brilliance of a single design. It was a move from the artisan age to the era of mass production. For the crews who fought in them, neither tank was perfect, but the Sherman's flexibility saved lives and created history. The silent lesson of the century remains that strength is not the absence of weakness, but the ability to recover faster than you fall. Victory was not decided by courage alone, but by the relentless capacity of an organized system.